My name is Andrew, and I'm an ordinary man. I'm 28 years old, married with two beautiful young children. My life, on the surface, looked like most others. I had a steady job as a soldier in the army, a beautiful wife named Olga, and kids who filled our home with laughter. My days were filled with the usual stresses, balancing work and family life, worrying about bills, making sure I was there for my family when they needed me. Like most people, I thought that the routine would continue forever. I never once considered the possibility that my life could end in an instant. My wife, Olga, was my rock. She had always been there for me, through every deployment and every difficult time. She would always tell me, "Come home safe." Those words, simple as they were, filled me with comfort and guilt at the same time. I loved my family, but I also felt that my duty to the Army was the most important thing. In my mind, I was serving a higher purpose, protecting my country. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. Something about the life I was living, something bigger than my military career and daily struggles. I had no time for spiritual matters. I would occasionally go to church on holidays, but I wasn't particularly devout. I believed in God, sure, but I felt distant from Him. I rarely prayed, and when I did, it was often half-hearted, almost like I was just going through the motions. My life was consumed with the tangible, the mission, the soldiers around me, and the daily grind. I believed that if I worked hard and did my job, everything would fall into place. Little did I know that this mindset would be shaken to its core, and everything I thought I knew would soon be turned upside down. It was a day like any other when everything changed. I was stationed in Ukraine, far from home, far from the comforts of family. It wasn't supposed to be anything too dangerous. We were assigned to secure a position on the front line. Nothing out of the ordinary. We were briefed, prepared, and ready for action. I thought it would be another routine mission. Another day spent with my fellow soldiers doing our jobs and coming back to base by the evening. I was focused, scanning the horizon, watching for any signs of enemy movement. The world around me was filled with tension, but I felt strangely calm. As a soldier, you get used to the chaos, the constant sense of threat. It becomes part of you. But as I stood there, feeling the familiar weight of my gear, there was a strange stillness in the air, as if time had momentarily frozen. Then, without warning, everything shattered in an instant. The explosion came out of nowhere. There was no warning, no time to react. I felt the shockwave before I even heard the blast, an intense pressure in my chest, followed by a blinding light and a deafening sound. My body was thrown through the air, and the world around me turned to chaos. Everything was a blur. Shouts, smoke, dust, and the horrible sense of disorientation. I tried to move, tried to find my bearings, but I couldn't. My legs felt like they were made of lead, and I could barely keep my eyes open. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the ground. Everything was dark, and there was no pain at all. The chaos from before seemed to be a distant memory. It was almost as if I had stepped out of my body and was looking at everything from a distance. I could hear voices calling my name, but they sounded muffled, as if they were coming from far away. I felt no fear, no panic, only a deep sense of calm, like I was drifting away from the world I knew. In the moment of the blast, I had died, though I didn't know it yet. My mind began to slow, and my body felt lighter, as if I was no longer bound by the weight of the physical world. I felt a strange, otherworldly sensation, as if I was floating in a void. There was no pain, no fear. Instead, I felt peace, a deep, profound peace that washed over me like a warm blanket. I couldn't explain it, but I knew, deep in my soul, that I was safe. I looked around, and I saw nothing familiar. The world I had known, the front lines, the soldiers, the smoke and destruction, was gone. I was no longer in the place I had been. It was as if I had been transported to a different realm. Everything was quiet, still, and the air felt different. It was thick with an overwhelming sense of love, a love so pure and overwhelming that I felt as if I were being embraced by it. And then I saw him. A figure appeared in front of me, bathed in a brilliant light. His presence was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. I couldn't describe his features. There was something about him that transcended human understanding. But his face radiated compassion, understanding, and unconditional love. I knew instinctively that this was Jesus. His presence filled me with an overwhelming sense of warmth and acceptance. There was no judgment, no condemnation, only an endless, eternal love that wrapped around me like a comforting embrace. "Do not be afraid," he said to me, his voice calm and soothing, like the gentle sound of a river flowing. I wanted to speak, to ask questions, but I couldn't. I felt an immense peace wash over me, and suddenly I understood. There were no words needed. His gaze alone was enough to communicate everything I needed to know. "You are not alone, Andrew," he continued. "You are loved beyond measure, and your journey is not yet finished." In that moment, I realized that my life on earth had been but a small chapter in something far greater. All the struggles, all the challenges, all the victories and defeats, it was all part of a much larger story. A story of purpose, of faith, and of love. I had spent so much of my life focused on the immediate, the here and now, that I had failed to see the bigger picture. But in his presence, I understood that there was more to life than what I had known. I was being called to something greater. "There is much you do not understand, Andrew," Jesus said, "but your journey is about to take a turn. You will see the future of humanity. You will witness the path your world is on, and you will be given the chance to help guide it." As he spoke, I felt a stirring in my soul, a deep yearning to know the truth, to understand the purpose of it all. And then, in a single profound moment, I was shown the future, events that would shake the very foundation of humanity. I saw wars, natural disasters, and global conflicts that seemed to threaten the future of the world. But amid the chaos, there was also hope. Hope that came from the people who would rise up, from the hearts of those who would return to faith and love. The world I had once known, the one I had fought for, was on the brink of destruction. But it was not too late. Through prayer, through faith, through love, humanity could be saved. And I, just a simple soldier, had been chosen to carry this message. I wasn't sure what it all meant, but I knew that my purpose had changed forever. My life, once filled with routine and duty, now had a higher calling. And as I stood there in the presence of Christ, I knew that everything had changed. I had been given a glimpse of the future, of the path humanity was headed down, and I understood that I had to return to my family, return to the world, and share what I had seen. I was no longer just Andrew the soldier. I was Andrew, a messenger of love, faith, and hope. "Go back," Jesus said with a gentle smile. "Your time is not yet finished. But remember, Andrew, what you have seen, what you have learned, is your purpose now. Let your heart lead you. Let love guide your steps. The world is in need of healing." And just like that, I felt myself pulled back. The peace I had felt began to fade, and the noise of the world slowly crept in. The warm embrace of love, the overwhelming presence of Christ, those things slipped away, but they left a mark on my soul that would never fade. I was no longer the same person I had been, and as I returned to my body, to the life I had once known, I knew that the journey ahead of me would be one of transformation, not just for me, but for everyone I encountered. The explosion hit without warning, the world around me disintegrating into chaos in a split second. One moment, I was standing, focused on the mission, and the next, I was airborne, my body propelled by the force of the blast. The deafening roar of the explosion filled my ears, and everything I knew, everything I had become accustomed to, was torn apart in an instant. The sounds of gunfire, the clatter of equipment, and the cries of my fellow soldiers seemed to fade into nothingness. I felt weightless, as though I were floating above the carnage, untethered to the world below. There was no pain, no fear, just an overwhelming sense of confusion. I could still feel the cold air rushing past me, but it was distant, as if I were no longer fully part of this world. Everything was blurring together. The dust, the smoke, and the fading sounds of war. My body, my mind, everything was slipping away. and yet there was no sense of panic. Only a strange, comforting detachment, as though I were being carried far from the violence into something else. I didn't know where I was or what was happening, but I wasn't afraid. Slowly, I began to realize that I wasn't just a soldier caught in an explosion anymore. I was elsewhere. I no longer felt the weight of my body, the tightness of my uniform, or the exhaustion that had once burdened me. I felt light, almost as if I were floating above my own physical form. The earth below me seemed so distant, so far away. It was as if I had transcended the reality I knew, and I was being lifted into something higher, something more profound. I wasn't in the middle of a war zone anymore. I was in a space of total stillness. And then, as I drifted further away, I felt an unexpected sense of peace, a peace that was unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't the calm after the storm or the stillness that follows an exhausting battle. It was a deep, all-encompassing peace, peace that reached into the very core of my being. I felt free, unburdened by the fears, doubts, and uncertainties that had plagued me in life. There was no guilt, no shame, no burden of responsibility. There was only a quiet calm, as if the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. The light around me grew brighter, and I began to feel a warmth, a lightness, like the embrace of something far greater than myself. It wasn't just the physical light. It was a light that seemed to come from within me, from the very depths of my soul. I couldn't explain it, but I knew. This was not just some figment of my imagination. This was real. This was more real than anything I had ever known. And in that moment, I knew that I wasn't alone. I looked around, trying to make sense of the world around me. But it wasn't a world like any I had ever seen. There were no walls, no buildings, no earth beneath my feet. It was as if I were suspended in a vast, infinite space filled with the most brilliant light. I couldn't see the source of the light, but I could feel it enveloping me, surrounding me on all sides. There was no sound, no movement, no time. Just an endless, beautiful stillness that seemed to stretch on forever. It was then that I felt a presence, something so powerful and loving that it immediately filled the space around me. This presence was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It was not an object, not a place, but a feeling, a warmth that seemed to reach into the deepest parts of my soul. And then before me, I saw a figure, a man, standing in the light. His presence was not only visible, it was tangible. It was as though his being was made of pure love, compassion, and understanding. His very essence radiated peace, and it washed over me like a flood. I couldn't describe his appearance in the way you would describe a person on earth. He didn't have the features of an ordinary man, but the essence of his being was unmistakable. His face was radiant, glowing with an inner light that made the surroundings seem dim in comparison. His eyes, those eyes, were filled with such profound love and understanding that I felt as though I could see into the depths of my own soul. There was no judgment in his gaze, no condemnation, only infinite acceptance and an overwhelming love. "Do not be afraid, Andrew," he spoke, and his voice was not just heard with my ears, but felt within the very core of my being. It was a voice of eternal peace, a voice that made all the fears I had carried throughout my life seem so insignificant. "I am here with you. You are not alone. I have always been with you, and I will always be with you." I wanted to speak, to ask questions, but no words came. There was no need for words. His presence spoke directly to my heart, and in that moment, I understood. I understood that I was not being punished, not being sent away. This was not the end. This was a new beginning. I had been called here for a reason, to learn, to understand, and to transform. The peace I felt was the peace that comes from knowing that everything, every struggle, every doubt, has a purpose. "You have come here for a reason," he continued, his voice calm and filled with a gentle strength. "The world you knew, the life you led, it was just the beginning. There is more, much more. You will see the future of humanity. You will understand the path your world is on, and you will be given the chance to help change that path." As he spoke, I felt something stir inside me, a deep yearning, a longing to know more. The questions that had haunted me throughout my life, the doubts, the uncertainties, they all faded away in the face of his words. There was no fear. There was only an overwhelming curiosity, a hunger for the truth. I wanted to understand, to see the bigger picture, to see the future that he was speaking of. And then, in a flash, I was shown it. The future of the world, the path that humanity was on, the choices that lay ahead. What I saw was both beautiful and terrifying. I saw the world in turmoil, wars, natural disasters, and human suffering. I saw the devastation that would follow, the choices that would lead to destruction. But amid it all, I saw hope. I saw people who would rise up, who would fight not with weapons, but with love. I saw a spiritual awakening, a return to faith, a return to love. This was humanity's chance to change, to break free from the chains of hatred, fear, and division. The future was not set. It was not predetermined. Humanity's fate was in its hands. But the path was not easy. It would take faith. It would take prayer. It would take love. And the world would have to choose. Choose whether to continue down the path of destruction or to embrace the light, the love, and the peace that was being offered. "You are a part of this," he said, looking at me with eyes full of compassion. "Your life, your journey, it matters. You have been given a glimpse of the future so that you can help others see it too. You have a purpose now, Andrew. It is not just to survive, but to help others find the way, to bring light into the darkness." I stood there, overwhelmed by the weight of his words, and yet, somehow, I felt light. I felt like I was being filled with a new purpose, a new calling. I had lived my life as a soldier, focusing on the physical, the tangible. But now, I understood that my true mission was spiritual. It was not about fighting battles in the flesh. It was about fighting the darkness within the soul. "Go back, Andrew," he said softly, his voice like a whisper. "Your time is not finished yet. You have much to do. But remember this: you are never alone. You are loved beyond measure, and you are here for a purpose." And just like that, I felt myself being pulled away, drawn back to the world I had left behind. The light began to fade, and the warmth, the peace, the presence of Jesus, all of it began to slip away. But even as it faded, I knew that I would never be the same again. I would never forget what I had seen, what I had experienced. And I would carry it with me, always, as I returned to my life. I knew that my purpose was just beginning. The moment I had felt his presence, everything changed. I wasn't just in a strange, peaceful place anymore. I was standing before a figure whose very being emanated love, warmth, and an unexplainable comfort. My heart raced, but not out of fear. Instead, it was a profound mix of awe and recognition. The light that surrounded him was unlike anything I had ever seen, not harsh or blinding, but soft and all-encompassing. It filled every corner of my being, making every part of me feel at home, at peace. He was standing before me, and somehow I knew this wasn't an accident. I wasn't here by mistake. I was here because I was meant to be. His form wasn't quite human, and yet, in some inexplicable way, it was. His face was filled with love, with understanding, but there was also a deep sorrow in his eyes. Not sorrow for me, but for humanity. I could see the weight of the world in his gaze. It was as though he had seen every pain, every injustice, every heartbreak, and still, there was nothing but infinite compassion in his eyes. I could feel his love, wrapping around me like a warm embrace. In his presence, there was no room for fear, no space for judgment, only acceptance. His love was so vast, so pure, that it made everything else fade into insignificance. "You are not alone, Andrew," he spoke gently. His voice was deep, not in volume, but in the way it resonated with the very core of my being. It was as if every word he spoke echoed in the depths of my soul. I felt his voice more than I heard it. It was a feeling of calmness, of reassurance. "I have been with you always, even when you didn't know it. You've asked yourself why you were here, why you were chosen, why you were in the military, why you fought. But now, you will know. His words were like a key turning inside me, unlocking something deep within. I stood there in silence, unable to speak, unable to ask the questions I so desperately wanted answers to. But in his presence, it didn't matter. I understood that he was going to show me the answers, in his time, in his way. As I looked into his eyes, I saw the truth in them, a truth that transcended my own understanding, a truth so profound and complex that it was hard to grasp, yet it made perfect sense. And then, as if in response to my unspoken questions, I felt my consciousness expand, as though I were being shown something far beyond the limits of this world. I suddenly felt myself drawn forward into a vision. The world around me shifted, and I was no longer standing in the stillness of that peaceful realm. Instead, I was seeing glimpses of what was to come. I saw the earth, not as a place of peace, but as a world on the brink of destruction. It was as though I were watching a terrible storm unfold. Cities crumbled under the weight of war. Nature turned against humanity in the form of devastating natural disasters, and the cries of those who had lost everything echoed in my mind. It was not a simple vision. It was a future I was being shown, a glimpse of what lay ahead if humanity did not change. But even in the midst of this chaos, there was something more. There were people, too. People who stood up against the darkness, against the violence, against the hatred. These individuals were not fighting with weapons, but with something much more powerful: love. I saw them praying, reaching out to one another, caring for the broken and the lost. They were the light in the darkness, and through them, the world had a chance to heal. But I also saw how fragile this hope was. I saw how easily it could be snuffed out by the overwhelming force of greed, power, and indifference. "This is the choice of humanity," Jesus said, as though reading my mind. "You are at a crossroads, Andrew. Your world is teetering on the edge. The path ahead can lead to destruction, but it can also lead to salvation. It is not too late, but the window is closing. The choices you make, every individual's choices, will determine the future of this world." His words rang in my ears, and I could feel the gravity of them deep within me. There was no sense of inevitability in his voice, no fatalism, only a deep, heartfelt call for change. I wanted to ask more, to understand how we could make this shift, how humanity could change its course. But as if answering my silent plea, he began to show me the way. I saw people turning back to God, seeking prayer and peace, forgiving one another. I saw communities coming together, not to fight, but to heal. Families restored, lives transformed, and I saw a new kind of power rising, one that didn't come from force or violence, but from kindness, love, and compassion. It was a power that didn't take, but gave, a power that healed wounds rather than inflicted them. But even as I saw these glimpses of hope, I also saw the forces of darkness at work. I saw greed, corruption, and hatred spreading like a plague across the world. I saw leaders who turned their backs on their people, who fed the flames of division and fear. I saw wars fought for power, for resources, for control, with no regard for the lives lost in the process. It was a stark contrast: the light and the dark, hope and despair, love and hatred, and the world seemed to be at war with itself. Jesus, sensing my turmoil, placed a hand on my shoulder. His touch was gentle but firm, a reminder of his unwavering love. "It is not for you to bear this weight alone," he said. "You must take what I have shown you, Andrew, and share it with others. You are not here just to witness this. You are here to be part of the change, to help guide others towards the light." His words filled me with a sense of purpose, a sense of urgency. It wasn't enough just to know. I had to act. I had to be the messenger of the hope I had seen, the hope that could save the world. I felt the weight of the task ahead of me. It was daunting, overwhelming even, but there was no fear, no dread, just a deep sense of responsibility and conviction. I understood now why I had been brought here, why I had lived the life I had lived. It was not just to survive. It was to help others survive, to help them find their way through the darkness. And as I stood there in the presence of Jesus, I felt my heart swell with love for humanity. Despite all the suffering, despite all the pain, there was still hope. There was still time. "Go back, Andrew," Jesus said softly, with a tender smile. "You are not finished. Your journey is just beginning. But remember, you are never alone. I will always be with you." And with those words, I felt a pull, a gentle tug back towards the world I had come from. The light began to fade, but the love, the peace, and the purpose he had given me remained. I was no longer the same. I had been transformed, and now I had a mission. A mission to share the love and hope I had witnessed and to guide others towards the path of healing, peace, and salvation. I felt it before I saw it, the pull, the soft tug back to the physical world. The warmth of the light that had enveloped me began to fade, not in a harsh way, but gently, like the setting of the sun after a long, peaceful day. The love, the peace, the wisdom that had filled me began to dissolve, and yet I knew it wasn't gone. It was inside me now, deep within my soul, like a seed planted in the earth, ready to grow. As I was being drawn back, I couldn't help but feel both sorrow and awe. I knew I was about to leave behind something profound, but also that I was going back to fulfill a greater mission. The next thing I knew, I was back in my body, lying on the battlefield. The sounds of war, the chaos, the shouts, and the noise of battle returned to my ears like a loud, overwhelming wave crashing over me. But it wasn't as it had been before. I was no longer just a soldier. I felt like I had become something more, something that had transcended the violence and the noise around me. I had been given a glimpse of a deeper truth, and nothing, not the sound of gunfire nor the urgency of my comrades' movements, could distract me from that truth. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my body once more, the familiar feeling of my uniform, the hard earth beneath me. But something was different. I was no longer just a man caught in the whirlwind of war. I had a purpose now. I knew why I had been brought back, why I had been chosen to live. It wasn't for glory, for honor, or even for survival. It was for something far greater. I had been shown the future, the potential for humanity, and I had a responsibility now to help others see it, to help them see the path of peace, of love, and of faith. I was a messenger, a guide, sent back to a world that desperately needed the light I had been shown. The familiar faces of my fellow soldiers appeared around me, but they seemed so distant, so far removed from the profound experience I had just had. I wanted to tell them, to share with them the overwhelming peace I had felt, the love I had encountered, but I knew they wouldn't understand. How could they? They were still bound by the world of pain, fear, and survival, just as I had been before. But that wasn't my mission anymore. I wasn't here to convince them in a single moment. My mission was to lead by example, to embody the love, the peace, and the truth I had experienced, so that over time, others could see the light too. I stood up, feeling the weight of the mission ahead of me. There was no time to waste. I could feel it, deep within me, a sense of urgency. The world was slipping away from the path of hope, and it was my duty to try to steer it back. I knew there would be obstacles, challenges, and even times when I would want to give up. But I also knew that the love I had felt, the peace I had experienced, was far more powerful than anything the world could throw at me. I had a new strength now, not from my physical body, but from something far greater. It was the strength of spirit, the strength of purpose, and the strength of love. As I walked back to the camp, my steps felt different. They were more purposeful, more deliberate. Every move I made was a reminder of the new life I had been given. My body, though still weary from the toll of war, was energized by the truth I had been shown. I knew that the war I was fighting now wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, and it was a fight for the hearts and minds of those around me. I wasn't just a soldier anymore. I was a messenger of hope, of peace, and of love. The thought of returning home to my family filled me with a new sense of longing. I'd been away from them for so long, and the thought of seeing my wife and children again made my heart swell with emotion. But I also knew that I couldn't return the same way I had left. I had changed. I had seen things that could never be unseen. I had felt things that could never be forgotten. And I had been given a message that I had to share. But how? How could I explain to them, to anyone, what had happened to me? How could I tell them about the love, the peace, and the truth that I had encountered? The question weighed heavily on my heart as I made my way back to the camp, but I knew that I couldn't carry this burden alone. I had to share it with others, not just through words, but through my actions. Every decision I made, every step I took, had to reflect the message I had received. I had to show them that there was more to life than war, than suffering, than pain. I had to show them that love, faith, and peace were the true answers to the world's problems. And that meant living my life in a way that reflected that truth, no matter how difficult or uncertain it might seem. I reached the camp and my comrades greeted me, but their words felt distant. I couldn't quite connect with them the way I had before. It wasn't that I didn't care about them. It was just that I had seen something far beyond what they were focused on. I knew that the world they were fighting for was not the world I had come to know. They were still trapped in the cycle of violence, but I had seen a way out. And I knew that somehow I had to help them see it too. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to happen overnight. But I was ready. I was committed to my mission, and I knew that in time, others would see the truth as I had. As the days passed, I began to notice changes within myself. I felt a deep sense of peace, even in the midst of the chaos around me. I no longer felt the need to prove myself, to fight for recognition or respect. I knew that I had nothing to prove to anyone. My worth wasn't defined by the number of victories I had, the battles I had won, or the honors I had earned. My worth was defined by the love I gave, the peace I carried within me, and the light I shared with others. I was no longer just a soldier. I was a beacon of hope in a world desperately in need of it. Every time I spoke to someone, I found myself sharing the message I had been given. It wasn't through grand speeches or dramatic gestures. It was in the small, everyday moments. It was in the way I treated others, in the way I responded to fear and anger, in the way I showed compassion to those who had lost hope. And slowly, very slowly, I began to see something remarkable happening. The people around me, my comrades, the ones I had fought alongside, began to change. They began to notice the peace I carried, the calmness that seemed to radiate from me. And they began to ask questions. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't some sudden transformation, but it was happening. I was witnessing it, step by step. And I knew that this was only the beginning. The message I had been given, the love I had felt, was spreading. It was catching fire, one heart at a time. And while I knew the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, I also knew that I had the strength to face it. I had been sent back for this purpose, to be the light in the darkness, to share the message of hope, love, and faith. And nothing in this world, no matter how dark or difficult, could extinguish that light now.